When you're born into a family with a last name like Sterling, you're taught from day one that blood is thicker than water. That family is everything. It's a lie, a brutal, soul-crushing lie. Because when my father, Walter Sterling, died, my brothers, Derek and Julian, didn't just betray me, they erased me. They took my legacy, my history, and my dignity. If you've ever felt betrayed by the people who were supposed to be your biggest cheerleaders, hit that subscribe button right now. We're going to dive into the raw, unfiltered truth of what it really means to have your family turn on you. This isn't just my story. It's a testament to every person who's had to fight for their worth. I'm Ryan Reed. I'm 31 years old, and 5 months ago, my entire world imploded inside a conference room so cold. It felt like it was insulated with ice. It was the reading of my father's will. My father, Walter Sterling, was a man who built a tech empire from nothing, a man who measured love in profit margins and saw his children as assets. His company, Sterling Analytics, was his masterpiece, worth an estimated $16 million. And in that room, it felt like he was still conducting a masterclass in transaction. The irony was suffocating. I was there, sitting at a gleaming mahogany table that probably cost more than my entire apartment, with my brothers on either side of me, their polished shoes silent on the Persian rug. They were in their element. Derek, the golden boy, all sharp suits and predatory smiles. Julian, the smooth talker, already texting his wife about which European vacation they'd book first. They didn't even pretend to hide their excitement. Every few minutes, they'd glance at me with barely concealed amusement. They'd always seen me as the punchline, the afterthought, the kid who didn't belong because my mother was just a ward, a special project to my father, never a wife, never family. I've spent my whole life trying to prove them wrong, trying to earn a seat at that table. But the truth is, a guest will always be a guest. Our family lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies, read the will with the practiced, emotionless cadence of a funeral director. He spoke of assets, portfolios, and intellectual property. When he got to the section on who would inherit the company, Derek and Julian actually leaned forward, their eyes gleaming. I watched as they divided my father's empire like kids sorting through Halloween candy, their eyes wide with greed. The Manhattan headquarters, the patents, the offshore accounts, it was all theirs. The silence in the room was heavy, but the sound of their unspoken victory was deafening. I waited, a knot in my stomach, for my name to be called. I'd worked 18-hour days for this family, been the one to fix their problems, and took the blame for their failures. I figured my inheritance would be small, maybe a few $100,000, something to acknowledge I was at least a footnote in the Sterling legacy. But then Davies reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single, worn leather journal. It was small, dusty, and bent at the corners, looking completely out of place next to the formal legal documents. I felt every eye in the room turn to me, especially Julian and Derek's. Their smirks were wider now, a silent, cruel joke passing between them. My name was scrawled across the front of the journal in what looked like my father's shaky handwriting. This was it. This was all I got. My brothers took $16 million, and I was left with a piece of paper that looked like it had been forgotten in an attic for decades. The insult was so profound it hit me like a physical blow. The air felt thin, and my throat tightened. Julian laughed, a soft, chilling chuckle. Well, I guess the old man finally showed you your place. Ryan, sentimental value is all you're good for. They didn't just inherit the money. They inherited the power to humiliate me one last time. I could feel the hot burn of tears, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I just sat there, clutching that dusty journal, my heart pounding with a mix of fury and despair. This wasn't the end of a long, painful story. It was the beginning of a whole new kind of battle. And as I walked out of that room, with their cruel laughter echoing in my ears, I knew something had to change. My brothers took $16 million, and all I had was a dusty envelope. What I would later find inside would change everything. I felt a quiet fury ignite inside me as I walked out, leaving the world they ruled behind. They had no idea what was coming. I didn't either. But I knew one thing: their empire was built on a lie. And every lie eventually gets exposed. I'm going to tell you exactly how I found out what that lie was, and what happened when I did. So stay tuned. That's what they wanted. Wasn't it to make me feel like I was starting from scratch? To make me feel worthless? And in that moment, standing outside the Sterling estate with that pathetic little journal in my hand, they almost succeeded. It felt like I was 15 years old again, standing on the same manicured lawn, watching the same people laugh at me. That's where this story really begins. Not with the will, but with a life spent trying to fit into a space I was never designed for. My entire existence felt like a footnote. I was the secret son, the evidence of my father's single mistake with his secretary. I wasn't born in a hospital. I was delivered in the tabloids. My mother, bless her heart, was just this quiet, brilliant woman who loved data more than people. And I guess, for a while, she loved Walter Sterling too. My brothers, on the other hand, were the main event. Born from a different mother. An old money Sterling from a family with a pedigree as long as their driveway. Derek and Julian were groomed for this life. They had their names engraved on everything: their bedroom doors, their polo mallets, their silver cups from sailing regattas. My name, Ryan, wasn't on anything. My bedroom door just read guest room 3. I didn't get a room. I got an asterisk. Growing up, I learned to be invisible. At family dinners, I sat at the far end of the table, a silent observer while my father lectured Derek about market trends and quizzed Julian on corporate mergers. I'd just listen, absorbing everything like a sponge, trying to earn my place through knowledge if I couldn't through blood. Derek and Julian, a few years older than me, made sure I never forgot my place. To them, I wasn't their brother. I was a living, breathing reminder of their father's betrayal. I was the punchline to their private school jokes. "That's Ryan," Derek would tell his friends, pointing at me like I was a piece of strange art in their house. "Dad's mistake. We keep him around because Dad feels guilty." I remember one time, it was Julian's 12th birthday. We were all at the Hamptons estate, and a giant party was in full swing. My birthday had been a week earlier, a quiet dinner with my mom and dad, where he spent most of the time on his phone. Julian got a brand new dirt bike. He spent the whole afternoon racing it around the property, kicking up dust and showing off for his friends. I was just sitting by the pool, watching. I remember asking him if I could try it, just for a minute. Julian laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that I can still hear today. "Ryan, dirt bikes are for people who belong here. You might scratch it." He then turned to his friends and winked. "He doesn't get it. He's not really one of us." That was the theme of my childhood. I was always on the outside looking in, desperately trying to prove I was worthy of their love. I wasn't just fighting for my father's recognition. I was fighting for my mother's honor, her brilliance. She died when I was 7, and they told me it was a tragic accident, a car crash on a rainy night. My father took me in after that, not out of affection, but out of obligation. I was evidence he couldn't hide. He put me in private schools with my brothers, but he never actually treated me like his son. The few times he would acknowledge me, it was always with a transactional tone, a cold, distant look in his eyes. He'd ask if I was performing well in school, not if I was happy. I was just another asset to be managed. My brothers saw me as a punching bag, a convenient scapegoat for their countless messes. When Derek crashed his new sports car into the neighbor's fence, he told my dad I was driving. I took the blame. even though I didn't even have a learner's permit. When Julian cheated on his finals, he told my father I had helped him, making me the accomplice in his deceit. I did it. Every time. I thought if I just did enough for them, if I just made myself useful, maybe one day they would see me as one of them, a part of the family. I was a professional at being a doormat. The worst part was watching them get everything I craved without even trying. They partied their way through life, had their college tuition paid for, and were handed jobs at Sterling Analytics with a golden parachute. Meanwhile, I had to bust my ass for scholarships, working late nights to get into a good program. I outperformed them in every single metric, but none of it mattered. It was a game I could never win. They had the birthright, the last name, the inheritance. I had the leftover scraps. It's funny, looking back, how many little things were actually telling me the truth. My father never called me his son. He'd introduce me as his special project at company galas, or the young man he mentored. It was a constant reminder that I was an accessory, not a member. They'd stand on stage for photos while I held their coats off camera. They'd laugh and celebrate with their wives while I stood 3 feet away, invisible. It was an unspoken rule they were the family, and I was just there. And after all those years, I still couldn't bring myself to throw away the hope that one day he would change. I hoped he would finally see me, truly see me, and say, "You did it, son. You're one of us." But that day never came. And as I sat in that conference room, watching them divide my father's fortune, I knew it never would. I was just a part of the show, a forgotten prop in their victory. And I was about to find out exactly what their victory cost. After that day, after the will was read and the laughter died down, I realized something. They didn't just inherit the money. They inherited my father's ability to be cold, to be transactional. They inherited his language. I had spent my entire life trying to speak that language, trying to prove my worth in a world that only valued profit and loss. It wasn't just a matter of birthright. It was a matter of survival. My father never saw me as a son, so I tried to become his most valuable asset. My brothers never saw me as a brother, so I tried to become their most reliable ally. I figured if I couldn't be family, I could at least be indispensable. And so, I became the family's problem solver. When Derek, in his early 20s, got his first DUI, it was me who stayed up all night with the family lawyer, compiling a defense strategy that got the case dismissed with a slap on the wrist. Derek never even said thank you. He just gave me a knowing look, as if to say, "This is what you're here for." When Julian's grades slipped in college way below the gentleman's C average, my father expected it was me who secretly tutored him for his finals, poring over textbooks late into the night. He passed with flying colors and took all the credit. I didn't get a word of gratitude. I got another look, this time from Julian. That said, "You're a tool, not a teammate." I remember one time when I was 19. Julian had a project for his business class, a complex financial model for a hypothetical tech startup. He was in over his head, and the deadline was looming. He called me in a panic, and I dropped everything to help. For 3 straight days, I worked on it, barely sleeping, fueled by coffee and the faint hope that this would be my moment. The night before it was due, he came over to my dorm, saw my work, and just nodded. "Yeah, this looks good. I'll take it from here." He then handed me a crumpled $50 bill. "Get some food," he said, as if he were paying for a delivery. I didn't take the money. I just watched him walk away with my work. I thought about what my father would have said if he knew, but I already knew the answer. He wouldn't have cared about my effort. He would have cared about the result. And Julian had the result. But the worst betrayals weren't the small ones. They were the ones that hurt me professionally. I was passionate about tech, not just about the numbers, but about the innovation, the ideas that could change the world. It was a love I got from my mother, and it was a language I spoke fluently. I went to school for computer science, and I was good at it. I was so good, in fact, that I started building my own side projects, working on an algorithm that could analyze user behavior in a way no one else had done before. I called it Synapse. It was my masterpiece. It was a code that could predict a user's needs before they even knew them, a truly revolutionary piece of software. I thought about keeping it to myself, but the fool in me, the kid who still longed for a family, decided to share it with them first. I thought it would finally get their attention. I thought it would be my golden ticket. I called a meeting at the Sterling offices, a rare occasion for me. I sat across from Derek and Julian and walked them through my concept. I showed them a small demo, a glimpse of what Synapse could do. I watched their faces, hoping to see a glimmer of recognition, a spark of pride, but all I saw was a practiced indifference. Derek yawned and checked his watch. "Ryan, this is cute," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's a nice little hobby project, but we're a business, not a lab. We deal with real products, not pipe dreams." Julian didn't even look up from his phone. "Yeah, maybe you can sell it on Etsy. I'm sure there's a market for digital doodles." They laughed, a shared, cruel sound that bounced off the glass walls of the conference room. I felt my heart sink. I had bared my soul to them, and they had spit on it. I left that meeting feeling defeated, my dreams feeling silly and small. A year later, Sterling Analytics launched a new product. They called it Horizon. It was a data analytics platform that was touted as the next big thing, the company's leap into the future. I watched the press release with a sense of dread. And as the presenter pulled up the demo, I felt a cold wave wash over me. It was my code. It was my algorithm. They had taken my work. They hadn't just dismissed my idea, they had stolen it. They'd scrubbed it clean, rebranded it, and put a new coat of paint on it. But I knew my work. I knew the elegant, intricate logic of my code. It was a cheap, watered-down version of what Synapse could have been. But it was mine, and they were taking all the credit for it. They were calling it the future of the company. I sat there, watching them smile and shake hands, talking about their vision. They had taken my blood, sweat, and tears and turned it into a profit margin. They didn't even bother to give me a cut, or a mention, or even a moment of acknowledgement. To them, I was just a disposable resource. I was a font of ideas to be drained and discarded. That was my purpose in the Sterling family. I was a tool to be used, a resource to be exploited. I had sacrificed my time, my energy, my pride, and my ingenuity, and all I had to show for it was a sense of profound, bone-deep weariness. I was a ghost in my own life. But that was all about to change, because that betrayal was just the beginning. I had no idea that they had taken more than just my code. They had taken my mother's legacy, and it was a debt I was about to collect. They took my idea. That was the last straw. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was professional. It wasn't just a matter of them not seeing me. It was about them actively working to keep me down. So, I decided to do the one thing they didn't want me to do. I decided to become my own man. I took every dollar I had, every bit of savings from years of grinding and living small, and I poured it all into building my own company. My office was my Brooklyn apartment. My staff was me, myself, and I. For months, I lived and breathed my work. I refined the algorithm they had stolen, making it leaner, faster, more intelligent than anything they could dream of. This time, there would be no taking credit. There would be no compromises. This was my legacy, built from the ground up, with my hands and my brain, and a determination so fierce it burned me up from the inside. I called the new software Synapse 2.0, It wasn't just about analyzing data. It was about predicting human behavior with an accuracy that was almost unsettling. I knew it was good. I knew it was revolutionary. It was my ticket out of their shadow, my way to prove that my worth was my own. After months of non-stop work, the moment finally arrived. I secured a meeting with one of the biggest venture capital firms on the West Coast, the kind of firm that could turn a solo developer into a tech titan overnight. This was my one shot, my chance to finally break free. I flew out to San Francisco, the city feeling alive with ambition and endless possibilities. I walked into their office, a towering building of glass and steel, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged. This wasn't the Sterling name. This was my name, my work, my legacy. I felt a surge of hope, a feeling so foreign and so powerful that it almost scared me. The pitch went perfectly. I presented my software, demonstrating its capabilities with a clean, confident elegance. The partners were hooked. Their eyes were wide, and they kept leaning forward, asking questions, their voices filled with genuine excitement. I could see the dollar signs in their eyes, but I also saw the recognition of a brilliant idea. I was doing it. I was finally making it. I was so lost in the moment, in the feeling of my hard work finally paying off, that I didn't notice the atmosphere in the room change. One of the senior partners, a sharp-looking woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, glanced at her phone. Her expression, which a second ago was a look of pure intrigue, soured. Her jaw tightened, and she looked up at me with a new, icy stare. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice completely different now. "We've just received some concerning information." My blood ran cold. My heart dropped to my stomach, a cold, hard knot. She slid her phone across the table. On the screen was a link to an article on a financial blog. The headline screamed at me, "The Sterling family's dirty secret rogue ward attempts to steal family IP." The article, written with vicious precision, painted me as a fraud. It claimed I was an ungrateful ward, a failed member of the family who was a financial and legal liability. It said I'd been given everything by the Sterling family and was now trying to build my fortune by stealing their intellectual property, a direct reference to the Horizon platform they had stolen from me. The author even cited unnamed sources close to the Sterling family. I didn't need to ask who the sources were. It was them. It was Derek and Julian. My world, which had felt so bright and full of hope just a minute ago, was now crumbling into dust. The partners looked at me with a mix of pity and disgust. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reed," the woman said, her voice now flat and final. "We can't invest in this. You're too much of a risk." The meeting was over. Just like that. The dream was gone. Sabotaged. I left their office feeling like a ghost. I got into my car and just sat there, staring at the phone, at the article that had destroyed me. They didn't just want to win. They wanted me to lose. They wanted to make sure I would never, ever escape their shadow. They had done it. They had won. I felt the familiar burn of tears. But this time, there was no fight left in me. I had given it everything, and it wasn't enough. They had taken my last shot. They had taken my dignity. They had taken my future. I put my head in my hands and just sat there, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. It was all over. I was about to turn my car on and just drive, not knowing where I was going, when my phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered it, my voice choked with defeat. "Hello?" A voice on the other end, old and tired, but kind, said, "Ryan, it's Mr. Davies. I assume you've heard. I'm sorry, but there's something your father wanted you to know. Something that's in that journal. It's time you learned the truth. My heart stopped. I looked at the phone, then at my briefcase, where the dusty journal sat. I thought it was just one final insult. I had no idea it was about to change everything. I looked at my phone, then at my briefcase, and back at my phone. Mister. Davies's voice was calm, but the words were a shock to the system. It's time you learned the truth. My hands were shaking. I'd always seen that journal as the final insult from a cold, transactional man. Now, it felt like a ticking time bomb. I didn't drive home. I drove to a park, found a bench under a streetlight, and with the city's hum as my only witness, I unzipped my briefcase and pulled out the journal. It was heavier than I remembered, the leather worn smooth in places. My name, Ryan, was written across the cover in my father's familiar, elegant script, but with a slight tremble that hadn't been there in years. It was the handwriting of a man with something on his mind, something heavy. I opened it to the first page. It wasn't a will, or a note, or a cruel joke. It was a series of dated entries, a mix of meticulous technical notes in what looked like a personal diary. The notes were from my mother, and the entries from my father. My mother's pages were a revelation. She wasn't just a secretary. She was an engineering prodigy, a brilliant mind who had co-created the first-generation Sterling analytics software. Her notes were filled with groundbreaking concepts for algorithms, ideas so far ahead of their time. They were still years away from being possible. She wasn't just my father's assistant. She was his partner, the true genius behind his entire empire. My heart ached with a deep, profound sense of loss. I had been cheated out of knowing this incredible woman my whole life. But the entries from my father, Walter, were where the real truth lay. They were a confession. He started writing them a year after my mother's death, as if trying to offload a burden he could no longer carry. He wrote about his love for her, a deep, genuine love he'd never shown to anyone else. He wrote about his guilt, about the day she told him she was leaving, that she wanted to take her work and start a new life away from the cutthroat world of corporate business. And then came the part that made my blood run cold. He wrote about a call he received from my brothers, Derek and Julian. They had found out my mother was planning to leave the company and take her intellectual property with her. My father's words were a blur of rage and regret. He wrote that they saw her not as a person, but as a liability, a threat to their future inheritance. So they took action. They went to her workshop. They tampered with the car. They didn't just sabotage a project. They sabotaged her life. It wasn't an accident. It was a murder. They murdered my mother to protect their inheritance, and my father knew. He knew all along. The journal dropped from my hands. I sat there, trying to catch my breath, the world spinning around me. My whole life was a lie. My mother wasn't a tragic accident. She was a victim of corporate greed and familial cruelty. My father didn't take me in out of obligation. He took me in because he was drowning in guilt. He didn't cover up her death to protect his business. He did it to protect his sons. He chose them. He chose his blood. He chose his legacy. And in that moment, I hated him. I hated all of them. Then I saw a folded piece of paper at the bottom of the journal. A note, with a phone number and a single line of text. He's the only one who knows the whole truth. Call him. It was Mr. Davies's number. My fingers were shaking as I dialed. He answered on the first ring, like he had been waiting for this call for 24 years. I assume you've read it, he said, his voice quiet. Yes, I said, my voice barely a whisper. But I don't understand. The money, the business, what's going on? He explained that after my father discovered what his sons had done, he was consumed by a quiet rage. He made a new plan. He couldn't turn them in, but he could get justice. For the next 2 decades, he systematically built a second fortune, a secret one, separate from the company. Every illegal deal Derek and Julian made, every act of embezzlement, every dirty trick they pulled, my father documented it. He was a master of transaction, and he began a transaction of a different kind. He created a back door into his own company and secretly transferred the profits from his son's illegal schemes into a private account. He was building my inheritance with their stolen money. Your father was a master of his craft. Ryan, Davies said. He knew that one day he'd need proof. He was building an airtight case against them. And he left it all for you to find. The money is your mother's, and the evidence is your birthright. Davies sent me an email with login credentials. My hands were still shaking as I opened the laptop and accessed the bank. The logo of a Swiss bank appeared on the screen, followed by a login page. I entered the credentials, and the page loaded slowly. When the balance appeared, I had to blink. My vision went blurry, and I stared at the numbers. It was impossible. It wasn't a few $100,000. It wasn't even the $16 million my brothers inherited. It was over $120 million. I looked at the number, then at the journal, at the confession of a broken man, at the evidence of my mother's murder and my brother's greed. I had thought they took everything from me. I had thought I had nothing, but I was about to find out my true inheritance was power. A power so great, it could bring an entire empire to its knees. I was ready. The despair I felt after the venture capital meeting was absolute. I thought it was the end, the final nail in the coffin of my dreams. But then Mr. Davies's phone call in that journal gave me a new kind of clarity. The despair was gone, replaced by a cold, precise sense of purpose. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was an executioner. I had the power to not only reclaim my life, but to dismantle the lives of the men who took everything from me. I spent the next 3 days in a fog of documents and data. I met with Mr. Davies at his office, and together we went through everything my father had left behind. The worn leather journal was just the beginning. The hidden Swiss account was linked to a private, encrypted server. On it, I found a mountain of evidence. My father, in his final years, had turned his obsession with profit and loss into a meticulous record of his son's every crime. I found financial ledgers detailing corporate theft, spreadsheets tracking off-the-books deals, and recorded conversations where Derek and Julian casually discussed their illegal activities. It was a complete dossier on their criminal enterprise, all filed with the same cold, methodical efficiency my father had used to build his company. It was chilling, but it was also a masterpiece of revenge. He had given me a weapon to destroy them. The final piece of the puzzle was a single sealed envelope marked, "To be opened with Ryan." I opened it with Mr. Davies. Inside was a flash drive and a note. "This is the last piece of the puzzle. Ryan, the one that proves it all." On the flash drive, I found audio and video files. Walter Sterling, my father, had secretly been recording his conversations with his sons for years. I listened, my heart pounding in my ears, as I heard Derek and Julian, in casual, offhand conversations, confess to their crimes. I heard them gloat about outsmarting the authorities, about laundering money, and about their plans to expand the criminal enterprise to include more serious crimes. And then, I heard it. The one conversation I had been dreading. A conversation where they, in their own words, casually confessed to tampering with my mother's car. They laughed about it, calling it a messy situation they had to clean up. I felt a rage so pure and so intense that it felt like a white-hot fire burning through my veins. They weren't just criminals, they were murderers. They had taken my mother's life for profit, and my father had let them get away with it. I left Mr. Davies's office with a single mission. I wasn't going to just give the evidence to the authorities. That wasn't enough. They had humiliated me publicly. I was going to humiliate them in person. I called Derek's assistant and scheduled a meeting. "Tell him it's about the family," I said, and the tone in my voice must have been enough to make him listen. I met them in my father's old study at the Sterling headquarters, the same place where they had laughed at me just a few months ago. When I walked in, they were already there, sitting at the mahogany table, looking every bit the kings of the castle. Derek gave me a mocking smile. Well, look who finally came back to beg. "What? Did your little startup fail?" I didn't answer him. I just took a seat across from them. The change in my demeanor must have been palpable. I wasn't the same defeated kid they had laughed at. I was a different person entirely. My voice was calm, almost unnervingly so. "I'm not here to beg," I said, my eyes fixed on Julian. "I'm here to talk about your company and your future." Julian just smirked. "Don't waste our time, Ryan. We're busy men." I looked at them both, and for the first time, I felt no fear, only cold, hard clarity. "You think you know everything," I said. "You think you've outsmarted everyone, but you made a mistake. You forgot that every action has a consequence, and that every consequence has a price." I took out my laptop and began to present. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just laid it all out. I showed them the ledgers, the documents, the recordings. I showed them the proof of their illegal schemes. I watched as their smugness slowly drained from their faces, replaced by a growing look of horror and panic. Their skin went pale. Their eyes darted around the room, desperate for an escape. They had no idea how I had gotten this. They had no idea their father had been documenting their every move. When I got to the part about my mother, their faces went white. I showed them the flash drive, the last piece of the puzzle. I looked straight into Julian's eyes. He had always been the more composed of the two, the one who was better at hiding his cruelty. But now, he looked terrified. He knew. That was a long time ago. Julian whispered, his voice trembling. "It was an accident. We didn't mean for it to happen." I just shook my head. "It wasn't an accident. You killed her. For profit. For an inheritance you didn't deserve." Derek stood up, his face a mask of rage. "You think you can come in here and threaten us? I'll ruin you. I'll make sure you never work in this town again." I just smiled. A cold, humorless expression. "You already tried that," I said. "And you failed. Because unlike you, I don't need your approval. I don't need your money. I don't need your legacy. My father left me something far more valuable than a company." I took a deep breath, the weight of a lifetime of pain and hurt finally lifting from my shoulders. He left me the truth, and the truth is about to set me free. I stood up and looked them both in the eye. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for closure, and my closure is you getting what you deserve." I handed them a sealed envelope, a small, worn, and dusty one. "This is for you," I said. "It contains everything you need to know. Enjoy what you deserve. And as for me, I'm finally free." I turned and walked toward the door. I could hear their desperate whispers behind me, their pleas and threats. But it was just noise now. I had no idea what they were going to do. But I didn't care. I was finally free of them. And in that moment, I knew I would be okay. My journey had just begun. I walked out of that study and into the late afternoon sun, leaving them behind with their lies and their impending doom. It wasn't a triumphant feeling. Not yet. It was just quiet. A stillness I hadn't felt in my entire life. I drove away from the Sterling headquarters and didn't look back. For the first time, I felt truly free. The arrests happened a day later. I was in my apartment, sitting at my laptop, when the news broke. The on-screen headline screamed, Sterling Analytics executives taken into custody and massive fraud bust. I watched, numb, as the cameras showed federal agents swarming the building. The footage cut to Derek being led out in handcuffs, his face a mask of shock and rage. He was still trying to talk his way out of it, still trying to use his father's name, but it didn't work. Then they showed Julian, trying to run from the parking garage he had just inherited. He didn't get far. The news anchors called it the largest corporate bust in New York history. My father's meticulous record-keeping had finally paid off, bringing down the very legacy he had spent a lifetime building. My brother's empire collapsed entirely, just as I knew it would. Every asset was frozen. The properties, the yachts, the cars all seized by federal authorities. The board members scrambled to save themselves, but there was nothing they could do. Everything they had built was a house of cards, built on a foundation of lies and blood money, and it had all fallen in a single afternoon. They lost everything they thought they had won, everything they had stolen from me, and from my mother. It was justice, pure and simple, but that was their story. Mine was just beginning. The most surprising part of it all was what I did with the money. That $120 million was a weapon, but it was also a burden. It was built on a lifetime of pain and regret, and I couldn't bring myself to keep it all. I took just what I needed to be financially free. Enough to build a life on my own terms, a life without fear or dependence. The rest, I put to a different use. I changed my last name. From now on, I would be Ryan Reed. I started a non-profit foundation in my mother's name. We help young tech entrepreneurs who have been victims of corporate theft, giving them the legal support and the financial backing they need to fight back against big corporations who steal their work. We've helped dozens of people so far, and we're just getting started. It's my way of turning a tragedy into a triumph, of using my pain to help others find their voice. I finally understood what my father had done. I used to think his coldness was a rejection, but it wasn't. It was preservation. He couldn't love me openly because he knew that in doing so, he would put a target on my back. He had to keep me at arm's length to protect me from the greed and the evil he had created. He made me strong enough to survive on my own, to fight my own battles, because he knew that one day I would have to. He gave my brothers what they always wanted, the empire, and in doing so, he gave them the curse that would destroy them. He gave me what I never knew I needed. He gave me the freedom to walk away from it all and build a life of my own. My true inheritance wasn't the money, or the power, or the evidence. It was the knowledge that my worth wasn't tied to their approval. It was in my own character. My brothers never had a choice. They were born into the Sterling legacy, raised to run it, and ultimately destroyed by it. But I was the child who was never supposed to exist, which meant I was free to exist however I chose. Sometimes I wonder what my life would look like if I had taken it all, if I had let the greed and the revenge consume me. But then I remember what my mother died for, and what my father lived with, and I keep walking, because some inheritances are too heavy to carry. Some fortunes cost more than they're worth, and sometimes the greatest wealth is knowing that you already have enough. That's the truth about being the child who wasn't supposed to exist. Once you accept it, you're free to exist entirely on your own terms. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, or if you've ever had to fight for your worth, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Did I make the right choice? Would you have done the same thing? Your story matters. And if you want more powerful stories about finding your truth, getting justice, and turning your pain into purpose, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our community. Because together, we can change the world. Thank you for watching. And remember, your real inheritance is the freedom to choose who you become.